So when it comes to identifiers, these are the names of variables, functions, classes, and other items in our program. Now when it comes to classes, that will also refer to the objects or the instances that you create, but we'll talk about that in more detail later. These are also often referred to as handles, so especially when it comes to functions. So a handle, to hold on to something, to some value, but for the most part we'll refer to them as identifiers or simply variable names. Alright, a few notes on declaring and initializing variables and also some variable naming conventions. So firstly, you have to be consistent. So we go and choose the case that we'll be using for our variable names. And so the thing is, when we write our variables or choose names or identifiers for our variables, there cannot be spaces in between words. So here we have my cool variable, for example. You cannot have them be separated by spaces. So of course, if you have them close together, without spaces, then it will become difficult to read. We'll have many variables in our program and we'll read a lot. So we need to make it easy and quick to read. So we can choose between these cases and you have to stick to the one that you choose, okay? And this is how you stay consistent. So camel case, here you can see that camel case starts, so the first character of that first word will start with lowercase. Then the second word, the first character of that second word will start with an uppercase. And the same for each word after that will start with an uppercase. Pascal case, each word, even the first one, that first character in that word will start with an uppercase. Then snake case is all lowercase here. So an example of snake case. The words are basically separated here with an underscore. Later in the video we'll talk about what characters are legal in variable names. But for now, what we want to focus on here is these cases, and also you have to choose meaningful names. So not too short, not too long. Another tip is to declare variables right before and only as you need them. You might feel like declaring all of your variables right at the top of your file, but it's better to go and declare them before you need them and only as you need them. It's also for readability. So if you work on some code block, such as if statements or while loops and various other things that we'll discuss throughout the course, you don't want to scroll up the page to get to the variable, to try and remember what the variable names are and stuff like that, or the initial values that you have set. So keep them closer to where you actually use them, and it also has to do with scope. So we'll discuss this in a bit more detail in an actual demo shortly. Another thing is to always initialize variables before you use them. So it's similar to declaring a variable before you initialize it. You want to actually initialize the variable before you use it, otherwise it will contain what is known as garbage. There are some rules with regards to identifiers or choosing variable names. So firstly, they must begin with a letter or underscore. So they may not begin with a number, for example. They can contain letters, numbers, and underscores, but no symbols. So for example, you cannot use an exclamation mark, the @ symbol, the $sign, and so forth. They cannot have spaces, so it has to be one continuous name. The space will break it up, so that will give you errors. It has to be one name. Basically, that is why we use, again, camel case, for example, to make it easier to read. They cannot be C++ reserved words such as int or float. Also, finally, you cannot redeclare an identifier in the same scope. Similarly, if you bring something in like console output or cout as we've seen it, you'll get problems if you want to redeclare that. In some cases, you can actually redeclare things that you might not think you can, such as again cout, but you should not try and do that anyway, because so if you have using namespace standard, for example, if you have those declarations already available in some scope, whether that's global or in some code block, and you try and redefine that, you'll get a conflict and so you'll get an error. So again, here you have some that are legal and some illegal. I talked about cout. Same thing with float and int. Those are reserved words, so you cannot go and use those for variable identifiers. Experience points, again, you have a space there that has to be removed. Use something like camel case instead. Today's date, that starts with a number. Then you have your legal ones to the left here. Again, it can start with an underscore if you want, or it can contain underscores or numbers as well. Okay, so what are these keywords or reserved words? Well, this is a special class of identifiers in programming language. So these are predefined identifiers, or basically names that have special purpose or function in C++. You cannot redefine them, so you cannot use them as identifiers or names for your own variables, functions, and so forth. Now, some C++ predefined identifiers are not reserved, such as cin or cout, but are defined in libraries required by the C++ standard language, the standard for the C++ language. So again, in IOStream, for example, so those files that you include, and of course in the standard namespace. So when it comes to those identifiers, such as again cin and cout, it is recommended that you treat those as if they are reserved words. So in other words, don't go and redefine them. You can, in some cases, redefine those, but again, you can get weird conflicts and errors and stuff like that. So try and avoid that. So here are a few keywords, reserved words. So we've seen int already, float, double. You have stuff like delete, void, while, if, and so forth. So instead of listing them all out here, I'll put together an appendix and I'll attach that to the resources. Another thing to remember is that C++ is case sensitive. So these identifiers are all unique. So if you declare some variable with these names or identifiers, again, they'll all be unique because of the capitalization, all right?